The underlying legislation is that $72 billion ICE and Border Patrol funding bill that Republicans are trying to get to President Trump's desk. But the thing that stymied that plan last night was this anti-weaponization fund. Essentially, what we've seen is increasing GOP opposition and criticism of this fund. And essentially, Republicans said some of them wanted to see guardrails in this bill to try and block the fund overall. And some folks just wanted more information before moving forward. That sort of culminated with this meeting that Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche had with GOP senators yesterday. It lasted about 2 hours. And coming out of the meeting, there was still some opposition. I spoke to Susan Collins. She's the chairwoman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. She said she still wanted more information. And take a look at what Senator Mitch McConnell had said. He really didn't mince words about this anti-weaponization fund, writing in a statement, quote, "So the nation's top law enforcement official is asking for a slush fund to pay people who assault cops. Utterly stupid, morally wrong. Take your pick." So Anna, clearly Republicans not mincing words there. And essentially at the end of the day, because this was a curveball hurled at them at the beginning of the week, they couldn't find a way out of the mess and to solve all of their differences, which is why they ended up scrapping those plans for a reconciliation vote, letting these issues essentially fester over the next week and a half as they're on Memorial Day recess.
So that was what was going on in the Senate. Meantime, there is now a bipartisan bill in the House to block this quote unquote anti-weaponization fund. What can you tell us about this new potential legislation?
Yeah, it's important to note that this Republican opposition is not just in the Senate. It is very much so in the House. In fact, as you mentioned, we're seeing legislation now. There's a bipartisan duo of Brian Fitzpatrick, the Republican, and Tom Suozzi, the Democrat. These are the co-chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus up on Capitol Hill. They have a very brief, short legislation that would essentially say that no taxpayer funds can be used for this fund. The reasoning is that they say Congress has the power of the purse. They have overview over taxpayer money. And as a result, they are going to block any taxpayer money from being used to settle claims as part of this fund. Essentially, they're saying that this is not good for the country and that there's too many questions about what this money could be used for. Take a listen to what they said on Morning Joe this morning talking about this effort.
It's a one-paragraph law that says you can't use the money to fund this anti-weaponization fund. Sometimes people do stupid or really wrong things, and you need the other branch of government to stand up and say, no, that's wrong, that's stupid, we're going to stop it. That's the purpose of the checks and balances of our system.
A lot of people say things quietly, but when it comes to putting pen to paper and putting their name on this as a co-sponsor, they get a little bit hesitant. I'm working to change that. I will take the slings and arrows. I'm happy to do it. This is the right thing to do, and hopefully others follow. I think they will.
And Anna, worth noting that this effort by Fitzpatrick and Suozzi came one day after Fitzpatrick, again, the Republican in this duo, had sent a letter to Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche asking for more information about the fund. He told me that because he didn't get more information on it and more specifics, he's now moving forward with this legislation. Of course, the big question is, when could we see a vote on this, if at all? Congress out of session until the beginning of June for Memorial Day recess. I'm told from a source familiar with this effort that these two are going to wait and see if leadership puts it on the floor on their own volition. If not, they could look to other avenues, including a discharge petition.
Yeah, that's what we saw with the Epstein Act, and we saw how that all unfolded. Michael Schnell, thank you. Congressman Riggleman, what kind of political risk is there for Fitzpatrick, Republican part of this bipartisan legislation, him sticking his neck out there on all this, especially given what we saw this week with Massey and Cassidy?
Brian might be the last of the moderates. I served with Brian, in the 116th. And I think for him, right, being in a swing district, this is actually helpful for him. But I don't see a whole lot of Republicans signing on to this in the House. I think you're going to have more of a backlash in the Senate based on the fact that they're not up for election every 2 years. And you see with a lot of the Republicans, they're more worried about election than protecting the American taxpayer. And I'm going to be pretty personal here. What President Trump put out, his statement, and I just read it when you put it up, and I really appreciate it, is a liar and a grifter that's cementing his actual reputation as that. First of all, a lot of people say 1.8 billion or 1.7 billion. It's 1.776 billion, which is really a dog whistle to conspiracy theorists and QAnon. He's been posting on Truth Social with him as Q+. He's been doing all this type of stuff. And you also have self-dealing on a level we've never seen in the presidency, a corruption that is hard for us to even define or to get our arms around. And for me, as a former Republican, somebody who goes outside of constitutional bounds to gift his family with monies, it's not just, when he says that he isn't self-enriching himself, you're looking at the rise in his fortunes to $6.5 billion. He could be holding up to $10 billion in crypto. His sons are self-dealing in drone companies in the military industrial complex. And now he's trying to gift his friends, cronies, criminals, and cop beaters with a money line of $1.76 billion that mirrors what QAnon actually believed in the January 6, 2021, riot and the stolen election. So that's why this is so heinous. I think it's openly corrupt. And I think anybody who stands for it really does self-identify who's somebody who cares more about themselves and being reelected than the American people and the rule of law.
MS Now did speak to some voters in the swing state of Georgia about this settlement fund. Here's what they're saying.
January 6th, that should have been a dead issue. In other words, we resolved that. They were found guilty. Why would we give them some kind of fund to help them along when other Americans are starving?
So do you think they should be getting money to help with their legal?
No, not at all. No, they should do like we do. Like if I go to jail, I got to pay my lawyer fees and getting out of jail fees and all of that. No.
The government is not for the people anymore. The government has their own agenda.
Congresswoman Demings, how can Democrats channel this collective outrage that's out there beyond one moment, one news cycle?
Well, it's interesting to me to hear Mitch McConnell's statement, because when he really led the way for the president to be acquitted after trying to bribe a foreign power, Ukraine, when he led the way for the president's acquittal after instigating a riot at the Capitol. Look, I was in the House chambers on January 6th. That's a non-issue. You're talking about creating a fund for people, many of them pleaded guilty. And a fund to compensate them just makes absolutely zero sense. But the voters are basically saying and feeling like what Congress should be saying and feeling. This is ridiculous. And it's sad that there are still too many Republicans in Congress who don't have a floor. This is corruption at its best. Congress can stop it. Listen to the voters, the people who elected you, and do the right thing.
Liz, this panel that would be doling out the money from this anti-weaponization fund hasn't quite been set up yet, but plenty of people are already saying they are eyeing a payday, including convicted seditionist Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the far-right Proud Boys. He says he's hoping potentially for as much as $5 million. And several former Trump aides, including his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, who pleaded guilty to tax charges in Trump's first term. You have numerous convicted and pardoned January 6th rioters, one telling CNN that they hope to get $30 million. Liz, do you see this arrangement surviving litigation?
I think there are real doubts about the legality of this arrangement. It seems to be a plainly illegal theft of taxpayer dollars by Donald Trump and his Attorney General, Todd Blanche. The question legally is who is able to challenge this. There is a Supreme Court doctrine called taxpayer standing that makes it very difficult for citizens to challenge the misuse of their tax dollars. So it really falls to Congress to do that. And Congress is the best situated branch of government. They have under the Constitution the responsibility, not just the power, but the responsibility to safeguard taxpayer dollars. And it looks like they are stepping up to do this. In the meantime, there are other officials who have really just shockingly and unconscionably abandoned their constitutional duties. Todd Blanche, as the acting attorney general, has a fiduciary duty to the American people to defend against frivolous litigation like this lawsuit that Donald Trump filed that was the pretext for this settlement fund. He has a constitutional duty not to settle frivolous lawsuits out of taxpayer funds. And he really betrayed the American people in a staggering manner here, perhaps the worst betrayal we have ever seen from any attorney general in history.
And there are still some GOP Republicans publicly supporting this fund. Here's Republican Ralph Norman.
Yeah, I support it.
You do support it.
January 6th is an issue that was made up in the first place.
People were convicted of assaulting.
Well, I know that. That was a staged thing from day one.
Your Republican colleagues ran for their life and barricaded themselves in their chamber. Do you think they were acting?
No, there was a riot there, but it was a self-made riot by members who hate Trump. It was made up.
Congressman Riggleman, as someone who focused on extremism and misinformation and who helped the January 6th committee, what is your reaction to a sitting congressman saying the Capitol attack was staged, made up?
Disgust. When you have that kind of credulity and lying that's happening, you start to wonder what other words you can have to define it. Listen, our team found the January 6th or deciphered the January 6th text messages. And what people don't know about that specific individual, and I know Ralph Norman, I served with him, he called for martial law. He called for literally military seizure of machines with Marjorie Taylor Greene and the January 6th text messages. In that same interview, he also referred to January 6th and QAnon conspiracy theories on Ray Epps, which is actually one of the worst conspiracy theories that was pushed by Darren Beatty in the Revolver and also far-right, MAGA individuals. Here's the thing that, you have to start looking at is that anybody who supports this, and by the way, the list that you showed, I would love to talk about Michael Cohen and Peter Tickton. I know every single person on that list because I was the senior technical advisor on the January 6th committee. I did look at the weaponization of actual executive orders. But when you're talking about those two specifically, everybody else is scumbags. This might be the most esteemed list of scumbags you've ever put on your actual screen here, Anna. But when you're talking about Peter Tickton, he was the one who was the lawyer for the commutation of Tina Peters, which just happened through Jared Polis. He's also the one who just wrote the draft executive order to give the president more powers to seize voting machines. I don't know if people know that. And when you talk about Michael Cohen, somebody who came out who said he was somehow redeemed, a leopard doesn't change their spots, right? And what he's trying to do also, somebody who's also an adjudicated liar, when you see people like this going after the fund, it shows the absolutely moral debasement of anybody who believes in